Welcome back into another edition of Kolby's Corners Live, a special edition as we come to you here on Friday, October 3rd, ahead of the homecoming parade, ahead of homecoming festivities in the Wake Forest game, with an update, as was mentioned in Terradome last night on VTScoop.com. Expecting an announcement to come today with committee details. And then also got a sit down with current athletic director Whit Babcock and Bill Roth over with the Hokie Sports Network. So just sort of spitballing, talking through some of the updates there with the search committee for the head coach, some updates in there, and what all of that sort of means as we sort of piece through that heading into the weekend and actually have a game on the field tomorrow. So starting off with the search committee, listed an 8-person search committee. As mentioned, obviously Bruce Arians went on the Pat McAfee podcast and sort of brought himself in that name. Obviously a former quarterback here, Virginia Tech Sports Hall of Famer, Super Bowl winning head coach, still serving on staff with the Buccaneers in advisory role. Bud Foster, legendary D coordinator, Eddie Royal, obviously playing for the team. And then you get sort of more in that business acumen side. Bridget Ryan Berman, business exec and tech alum, Victoria's Secret, I believe, CEO at a time. Lynn Dowdy, retired chairman and CEO of KPMG. What's the Big Four? Shout out VTScoop.com if you want to learn what Deloitte and the Big Four are. Great place to go over there and do that. Brad Hobbs, obviously CEO of Air Control Concepts down in the 757 region. His son, Joey Hobbs, is on the football team, listed as out on the availability report this week. And then the two people on the special chair pretty much headed to lead up this are Ryan McCarthy and Jay Pearson from the Board of Visitors, handed down from the rector, John Rakovich. So obviously there's been a lot of discussion about that list. People already on the board saying, clamoring, like as you would expect on message boards and what would just sort of happen. How is there not that much football experience? Why do we have these people who don't know football, maybe don't even care about Virginia Tech? But, it's a good mix, I would think, of having business leaders who also have Hokie roots, as well as, obviously, football people with acumen, Bud Foster, Eddie Royal. A couple names, maybe a little surprising, left off the list. People are floating names over on VTScoop.com. Very, very active message board here on Friday, October 3rd, right ahead of homecoming, people making the trip up. But it was a big announcement. People had been begging and really searching for clarity on the committee, amongst other things. And a lot of those other things at the current athletic director, Whit Babcock, got into with a sit-down conversation with Bill Roth. And I think a really important thing to note through this whole process is the messaging with everything. The way it was rolled out to the BOV and that sort of got leaked out, the way Whit went up there and had obviously his scripted media read out to the media, didn't take any questions. The way Whit obviously sat down with Bill Roth, as he's done in the past, in his private, Hokie catered, just all around Virginia Tech media way, and rolling that out. And like I said, we're still hearing the fact that on Monday, going to have a pretty close group, condensed group of media members to have a sit down with them. And doesn't sound like we're on the inside there, but just really controlling the messaging, not letting it maybe run its course, but obviously trying to control the narrative in that way. And head over to VT Scoop. I had some notes on that in Terradome last night. If you have questions or just anything going on as we sort of talk through that, make sure to jump in the live chat and dump those. But I still do believe that, that you're going to see a restructuring of the athletic department. There's going to be a transition phase. And obviously comments were made on that podcast about futures and different things. So we'll talk about that. But it still seems the way that, there's going to be a transition phase, but there's going to be sweeping changes, and there's going to be new faces and people asserting and taking some of those roles. But some of these people just had to be the front people to get a lot of this across the finish line and play their role. And obviously the way they're rolling this out is a big part of that and part of, how they're controlling the media message. But just getting into some other things as we just talk about it, he did confirm that they're going to hire a head coach first, then a GM, sort of backtracking on what they had been saying internally. Now, a lot of this is agent driven, talking to agents, talking to different people. You had head coaches who were very frustrated at hearing that, they like the prospects of the budget and the prospects of all that comes with the job. But when you hear the athletic department, the search, whoever coming out and saying they're going to hire a GM first, it immediately annoyed some of the head coaching pool, saying, hey, like, you're going to make me come in and have to deal with someone that I maybe don't have a prior relationship with. And this was maybe hindering that head coaching pool. So heard a lot of pushback early from agents. Even Shane Beamer made public comments about this, not in reference to this specific job, but just in general. So they heard pushback on that, definitely made a pivot. So it came out and said that in the podcast, which I thought was pretty big. So that committee that they talked about is going to ID the top 2 to 4 names, and the final decision will really lay with the rector, John Rakovich and others. Obviously, Witt and President Sands were in that mix or listed there, but I think really it comes down to that rector, John Rakovich, as the guy for that next head coach once those committee dwindle those names down. So yeah, I think that's definitely a good note on the search order. Now the timeline, the committee begins in full force this week, Witt said. And like I said, take everything being said with a grain of salt, with obviously the messaging and the way it's getting rolled out. You could say a lot of things publicly on the record or the way, but things can shift in time. We've seen head coaches say, I'd never leave this job, and things change. So don't take everything at face value always. But obviously with the head coach, like we've been reporting over on vtscoop.com, you're not expecting a hire until the typical timeline, the end, late November, and hope like potentially not into December with signing day and different things going on then with the portal. But typically when you see the head coaching carousel, they're late in November, and then the GM search will follow closely after that once the head coach is in place. With the budget priorities, touching on the budget, obviously the $229 million investment into the athletic department was big. He cleared some of that up, but it was pretty expected. Obviously, the head coach hire, those assistant and staff salary pools being increased, recruiting budgets going up, which is really big, especially when you're trying to roll out a full new staff, expanding the football front office. He talked a lot about not wanting to be on the cutting edge, not the bleeding edge, but man, they've been really behind with the personnel decision. He brought up even personnel by names that have been well behind, like institutions like he brought up in Ole Miss and Vanderbilt and a lot of places that are not even on the bleeding edge, but just doing things that are well ahead of the curve. And they've seen the peers and just not making the adjustments needed. And when you do have good personnel in the building, letting them walk and letting other people who he named by name make decisions on personnel, that really hurt the product, even in the back end. So that's a little infuriating when you still bring those people up, and those people are obviously involved and, for good reason, some of them, but obviously well behind the curve on the recruiting set, like just a whole entire setup. So that's going to be a massive, massive change. That's going to have to happen when you bring in a new staff, because that's something that's been well behind the curve. And you see it at every college football institution that is operating at a high clip. That's one constant, and definitely not happening in Blacksburg. It hasn't been happening in Blacksburg for quite some time. Obviously, also going into facility upgrades and then reaching that long-term goal of $30 million annually from the Hokie Club and university advancement staff. If some of those, obviously, different people on the university side had rubs with people high up in the athletic department, and I know people made comments about how long they're willing to stay or what's happening, but with some projected, as we're hearing people maybe moving on, the university is a lot more willing to work with the athletics department. Some people high up in athletics really weren't the easiest or most convenient, and they had tough relationships with people over on the university side for a lot of those funds. So clearing some of that out and rebuilding, I think there'll be a lot more accommodating to work with athletics as opposed to some prior leadership that's still obviously in leadership. So that $30 million could come through new revenue streams, premium seating. He talks about exceeding projections and different things in that manner. He obviously brought up, as he does in pretty much all these talks with Roth, the fans have been doing their part. It's time for us to do ours. Obviously, I think he's had a couple of these now where it's always like the bill, whatever, the buck stops with me making these hires, which, you've heard that the last couple of times. Obviously, people are voicing their frustration on that. And then he sort of wrapped it up saying he said he's looking forward to staying on, essentially, starting year 13 in January. And we'll see about that. Like we said, talks on Monday. A whole lot of shakeup, a lot can happen between now and then. I would just make sure to stay tuned in on vtscoop.com. Still pretty firm on that side, and just make sure when you stand when all the dust shakes out. People are saying a lot of stuff that's been pretty much wrong as new details have been coming out. I feel like we still feel pretty firm in the reporting. So just make sure to stay tuned in over these next couple of weeks. It's going to be a lot with the head coach, GM, and other staff as that rolls out. There will be a transition period, and obviously a lot of people will catch golden parachutes, but there's going to be a lot. And, there's a football game tomorrow, and it seems like we've done a lot of talking about everything off the field. Those are just some of those initial thoughts after seeing that press release as we were expecting today, and just some of those news and notes. And like you said, you got to take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt when, the messaging is coming from certain channels and people. So, but I mean, that budget really is approved. I got calls from agents on the committee and different things just already, obviously, invested in and wanting to see that direction. But there still is a lot of questions, especially when you're hearing one thing on that side and then you're hearing something else come out to the public. And pretty much when you're rolling this out to the base, and you're maybe saying something different. So still a lot of questions, but I think definitely some answers in there, but you have to find your way and read between the lines. And the best way to do that is go get a VIP subscription at vtscoop.com to take out a lot of the guesswork in there and really know what's happening with the most just up-to-date info as we get rolling into this offseason that's going on during the season. So, like I said, that was just a quick emergency special episode of Kolby's Corner to touch on some of the things that you heard, maybe some of the things to actually look for in that process. The committee's been going. I know there was some confusion or maybe frustration with why is it taking so long. They've been working, but they obviously made the pivot looking for the head coach. So really digging their heels in this week. And now you've got a couple month and a half to figure out and then make that pitch. And I think we'll have some clarity on some of the back end stuff before then, maybe as early as next week. So make sure to stay tuned in to vtscoop.com. And have Kolby's Corner right after the game tomorrow. If you're making the trip up, be safe. Enjoy the homecoming festivities this weekend. And yeah, have a great homecoming weekend. Enjoy some college football this weekend. We'll see you next time on Kolby's Corner. See you next time.